Welcome to Loyola Marymount University. I'm Fernando Guerra, professor and director of the Center for the Study of Los Angeles. Today we have with us former Mayor Richard Riordan, also of course a philanthropist, a venture capitalist, an attorney, and an all-around good guy, Mr. LA. He was obviously mayor for 8 years, and we're going to talk about that, but also what led up to him becoming mayor and what he's been doing since. And it's, of course, all in his book. He's written a book called The Mayor, How I Turned Around Los Angeles After Riots, Earthquake, and the O.J. Simpson murder trial. And there are several students here who have held up the book and have read the book, so we're going to open it up to questions, Mr. Mayor, and let them ask you the hard questions. I'm going to give you a bunch of...
Can I ask a favor
Sure.
out of you? Never refer to me as a philanthropist.
Okay, and why is that?
In the Oxford Unabridged Dictionary, it defines a philanthropist who gives back to the public a small percentage of what he stole from the public.
Ah, so
And
you
also-
give a large percentage of what you stole, or you didn't steal any? Is that what you're trying to say?
I gave 1% of what I stole.
Okay.
No, and then the other thing is, a philanthropist is somebody who puts self-aggrandizement above cheating.
But you know what? I don't think that we currently use. I find that word as a very positive word, and I think it's become something that's been very positive. To be a philanthropist and philanthropy is very important in our society, and I think you should own that word, because most people, when I think about it, I would love them to be philanthropists like you have. And I'm expecting that there's a lot of students here who are going to make a lot of money because they've graduated from Loyola Marymount University, and I want them to be philanthropists, especially for the Center for the Study of Los Angeles, and other endeavors that we have here at Loyola Marymount. But it's interesting.
The person who is in charge of all the money I've ever made is sitting here in the audience.
Yes, Jessica Flores, an LMU grad, class of 2003.
Stand up there. Come on, Jessica.
So it only makes sense that a philanthropist would trust an LMU grad to take care of his money and give it out. I mean, when you can't really trust a USC or especially a Pepperdine grad to be able to handle philanthropy. So it makes sense that it's an LMU grad. I totally get that. So why did you write this book?
First of all, I teach at UCLA, and I'll go through that in a few minutes.
Where's UCLA?
UCLA is the football team that beat USC this year.
Oh, yeah. Hey, LMU didn't lose a single game this year.
But Anderson, I'm at the Anderson School, which is their business school or management school there, and I teach on axioms. I said, giving people complicated books, they'll never remember anything. So I have 6 axioms, which is, one is courage, having the courage to do things. A corollary of that is it's much easier to get forgiveness than to get permission. So just do it. If it's ethical and practical, just do it and don't worry whether there are rules or whatever. Secondly is...
You recognize that there are, let me stop you there. I totally agree with that. I love that, and I would encourage people to do that. But we understand that there are people in certain positions, given where they are in the structure, where they cannot do that, where it would cause them harm personally, either being fired or losing money, and because of family situations or the structure that they find themselves in, they don't have the ability to do that. You've always been in a situation where you've had that ability. I think of myself as having that ability, but a lot of people are not in that situation.
Well, I hired the best and the brightest young people I could, and I gave them that power. I empowered them to do it. Just do it. Don't worry about rules or anything. Just get it done. And I remember during the earthquake,
Let's contextualize that.
Okay.
The North Ridge earthquake, 1994, was it, what was the month? January? January 17th. It was only like 6 months or so into your administration. And from my mind, it shaped your administration. It actually helped you do a lot of things that you ended up doing, because it gave the opportunity for you to put a lot of your thinking into government.
Right.
Tell the students a little bit more what happened that morning, because it was early in the morning.
Well, it was I think it was 7:31 in the morning, or was it 5:31? I get confused, but I think it was 5:31 in
Let's
the...
just say 6:31, put it in the middle.
Okay, middle. And I was knocked out of bed. It was a weird type of earthquake, which didn't shake you a lot, just bang. Knock you out of bed. I got up.
So literally, it knocked you out of bed.
I rolled out of bed, actually, and I picked up the phone. As mayor, I had to get things done, and the phone didn't work. I ran out to my car, which had a security phone in it. That didn't work. So I came back in, threw on sweat clothes, didn't even comb my hair, let alone take a
Let me
shower.
ask you something. Did you comb your hair today?
I have a toupee on.
Oh.
No, I don't. Yes. And I got in my car, and I got on the Santa Monica Freeway, which is the busiest freeway in LA at that time.
You live in Brentwood and you were on your way to downtown.
Yeah, on my way to downtown. And downtown, 4 floors under City Hall, was the Emergency Operations Center. But I got on the freeway, it was totally dark, I didn't see any other cars, and I was going about 80 or 90 miles an hour.
So wait a minute, you don't have a driver?
Well, I didn't then because I let my drivers go home at night. I'm not like most of these guys.
Okay.
And they normally would be there when I was leaving.
Right, right. And
But-
when you say most of these guys, who are you referring to?
The LAPD, yeah, right. I was going along the freeway, I didn't see any other cars, and all of a sudden I saw 2 big lights coming at me on my side. They were on the wrong side of the freeway. And I swerved a tiny bit to go around them, and then all of a sudden I stopped, and I saw that the bridge over La Cienega was collapsed. And that truck, it was a truck, saved my life, I think. I would have been flying off.
So he was going going east as well, and he had come up on that and stopped and
Stopped.
turned
He
around.
stopped, right.
And then you were probably going much faster than he was,
Right.
and that gave you the chance to stop. Unfortunately, there were other situations where people didn't stop, like the police officer up in coming down from...
Yeah, one police officer flew off one of the bridges and was killed. He was on his motorcycle. So I did a U-turn, I went up to the exit, I took surface streets downtown, and when I got in the Emergency Operations Center, inside, by the way, there were about 42 desks for each of the heads of departments, and there's a room for the police and the fire. I went to the area where the head of transportation was, and we put up a giant map that showed all the damaged bridges throughout LA. There were 5 over the freeway. And at this point, I said, okay, what are the detours? Explain me the detours. And they said, well, on the Santa Monica Freeway, there'd have to be 3 streets that go through Culver City. And by state law, you have to have the state hire a private firm to study the situation and approve it. And then it will be sent to the legislature in Sacramento and then to the city councils downtown. He said normally it would take about 3 years, but I bet now you could do it in 6 months.
Yep.
And I said, no, you have 5 minutes to do it. You take over those intersections, and here is my home number. And I said, you give my home number to anybody that complains about doing that. They can call me, and I'll ask for forgiveness.
Right. And so here comes the whole statement that you say, just do it, and then don't ask for permission, ask for forgiveness later on. And further contextualize this, we're talking about transportation. In the city of Los Angeles, we have our own Department of Transportation, and you mentioned Yates, who was at that time the head of transportation. But we also have the MTA, the Metropolitan Transportation Agency, which we'll talk about a little bit. They actually control buses and the subway. Then we also have Caltrans. And then we also have the city, Culver City, et cetera. So we have fragmentation or decentralization, as many of the students are aware when we're studying Los Angeles. There's an incredible decentralization that's happening, and we did that on purpose during the progressive era, so we wouldn't have a strong mayor, that we weaken the mayor. Okay, and the system tends to work to bring everybody to the table when we have time to plan out for 20 years or 30 years. When there's an emergency, the system doesn't work. And we don't have a system to allow us to have quick action. You have a system, and it's in the back of your book, and,
Yeah.
and you said, hey, let's just do it. And you actually took over streets from a different city and just said, let's do it.
Well, you want to hear the weirdest part of it was the state constitution provides that in an emergency, the county takes over the leadership from the city. In this case, I ignored the county. I think they were happy that I took it over because they never complained, and nobody from the state or the federal government ever questioned me on it. And I have in the book, it mentions also perceived power can be used as real power. If people perceive you have the power, then act as if you have it.
That's right. In Los Angeles, many of us believe that you as mayor are the executive and you are in charge of Los Angeles. You are in charge of transportation, you are in charge of education, you are in charge of air quality, you are in charge of planning for the whole region. You are in charge of none of those things,
Right.
theoretically. But you put yourself in a position where you acted as though you were in charge in the moment of crisis, and people just responded.
One of my proudest times was, this is well after the earthquake, I went down to a poor city in South LA, or neighborhood, and I met with the people that lived there, and they asked me questions. They said, what are you going to do about the holes on the street, the sidewalks broken up, the trees overhanging, the graffiti, the prostitutes, the drugs? And what do you think my answer was? Yeah, nothing. I said, I'll do nothing. I'm not going to do anything. You're going to do it. And here, I gave my home number again. If anybody complains, have them call me and I'll ask for forgiveness. Well, they took it over, and 6 months later they invited me back. And I went to that neighborhood, and it was perfect. They had graffiti. They said they painted over the graffiti every morning until the graffiti artists got tired of doing it. They walked rings around the prostitutes at night where they gave up. They filled the potholes in the street, the cracks in the sidewalk, and they're really proud. And I said, well, how about the drugs? And some guy looked at me with a smirk on his face. You know, Mayor, that mysteriously burned down after you were here last year.
So let me tell you something. I love that story, okay? And it shows that people can take action when they are empowered. But I also have a problem with that story, and that is, if we let every neighborhood do that, and we start burning down houses that have problems, so there's a line that it crosses in terms of being a vigilante.
Well, the question
how do you
is,
control that?
well, I mean, if they burn down something that's not a drug house,
But they don't like the activity that's going on there because there's some,
yeah, maybe there are a bunch of Democrats in one of the houses.
could be, or it could be, you know, a bunch of kids from Pepperdine move into the neighborhood of Westchester. It's like, we don't want that. We burn the house down. And so all of a sudden it becomes vigilanteism in terms of what you don't like. You see that there's a fine line. I mean, I totally agree with what you're saying, that let's empower people, take ownership, do the right thing. But then you get to a point where people become, and they start defining those. In terms of the situation that you described, I have no problem with it. But there is that gray line when you get past and you become a vigilante.
Well, I think you have to use that judgment. Everybody has to. And I honestly never, that was the only time anybody mentioned burning something down. But
So you condone burning down a building?
I drew getting rid of that drugs.
I
agree with anything.
I want to be kind of like an LA Times reporter and completely rephrase this. You condone burning down a building?
No, I mean, what, are you going to get me arrested or something?
I think the statute of limitation has passed, so I think you're okay. So let me take you back, though, before you became mayor, and do basically two questions. One is the context, and then how you made the decision to run for mayor. I actually met you the first time in 1992, in the summer, after the riots had occurred, and an organization called Rebuild Los Angeles, which, by the way, the university and its library has the archives of the Rebuild Los Angeles organization. And it was an effort after the riots to try to rebuild Los Angeles. And for a variety of different reasons, about 200 people were asked to attend this meeting. And I got to go, and I got to meet you for the first time. And I had heard of Richard Riordan, and you know what was impressive, and you actually actually mentioned it in the
Before I
book.
was mayor, right?
This is before you were mayor, but I think you were already a commissioner for Parks and Recs during that time. You said something in the book that struck me, that businessmen will do things if they are asked, number one. But number two, a little bit of a criticism, that they tend to go to that first meeting and you can't sustain their interest. Okay? I remember going to the first meeting, you were there were all kinds of other prominent businessmen, et cetera. But after a while, you saw the drop in the business people, but yet the community people, educators, et cetera, they were still going, and you were still going. But so my question really is about that time period. You were engaged, you were part of the Park and Rec Commission, you were involved in all kinds of philanthropic efforts, and you were involved in Rebuild LA, and you kept going to those meetings when many of your fellow businessmen stopped going. How, not you, but how could the city in general, without someone like you, engage businessmen to be more civically minded?
I think it all comes down to the mayor of the city. And I may have been somebody that took over more power or what have you, but whoever the mayor is going to get the attention of the business people. So if the mayor asks a specific business person to help some, like after the earthquake, we asked Anheuser-Busch to supply some water. They supplied us
They have beer, though.
They gave us 2 million cans of beer that was filled with water.
Okay.
And we had tents that were given to us.
And I'm sure some of our students took some of that and sold it as beer in some of the parties that they had. But anyway,
Well, I remember you showed up and you were disappointed.
very disappointed. Okay, let me do a little bit of a role play. You're mayor, okay? I'm going to make this great assumption that I am a wealthy businessman, that I started a business and it's really grown. I have over 500 employees. I make my company makes millions of dollars. I make millions of dollars, and you want me to engage in some civic endeavor. And you call me up and you say, hey, Fernando, I want you to get involved in X. Convince me. How do you convince somebody?
By asking them to do something, and my criticism of the mayors after us, me, were they would ask for people like you that you described for advice. But what I did, I would ask you to get something done, not just your advice. And I found that nobody ever turned me down. And I don't think they would turn any of the mayors down. They say, I would like you to take over building that building, being the leader.
I just find like many businessmen would say, listen, Dick, can I call you Dick?
Yeah.
I have a business to run. I'm too busy. I got employees, and I'm really afraid of the civics. I'm not a politician. I don't want to get the name out there and get in trouble or have people not want to buy my product, et cetera. And just politics isn't just for me. I mean, can I just give you some money? But I don't want to be involved at all.
Well, I mean, I never had that happen to me.
I find that hard to, that's awesome. But I find that hard to believe, but that's great and you must have then, it's because you had that relationship as an equal, as a business executive to a business executive. Garcetti, Villaraigosa, and Hahn are not business executives. So they're approaching it really from a different perspective. They don't have that personal relationship. They don't have that same experience. And so it's a different dynamic.
Well, and we'll probably get to this soon, but if you look at them, because they're all bright people, Garcetti gives great speeches, he's very bright, but he never asks anybody, and he hadn't. I surrounded myself with the best and the brightest young people. He hasn't. And I would empower them to do things. Every day I'd say, do what you think is right for the city, not what you think the mayor wants you to do. And it worked like magic.
Yeah. Okay, let me go back to what I was saying. Right before you ran, how did you make the decision to run for mayor? I mean, while some of the quote-unquote players and business community knew who you were, you in the book even say that the first poll you did, only 3% of Angelenos knew who you were.
And the person that did my polling said, don't get a big head because 2% of them just say that about everybody, whether they know them or not.
So that's okay. So 1% of Angelenos knew who Richard Riordan was, and yet you decide, okay, 1% of the people know who I am. I'm going to run for mayor.
Well, I had, Bill Wardlaw, of course, Bill was my,
I know Bill Wardlaw, but tell the students who Bill Wardlaw is.
well, Bill Wardlaw is now with Freeman Spogli, which is one of the big hedge funds in the country. And he also ran Senator Cranston's campaign, and he was a political junkie. He loved politics. And when we got to the
And a Democrat.
and he's a Democrat. And when I was on the Recreation and Parks, I was the main one there asking for us to spend more money in the inner city on parks because with Prop 13, all of a sudden you had the wealthy areas could take their extra money and put it into parks. The millionaires from Watts didn't exist, so they didn't put the money into the park.
Right.
So I changed it so that the inner city parks would get as much per capita as the western parks, but that wasn't easy. And I think Bill saw me as somebody who wants a city to be run well for everybody.
So did you come up with the idea for you to run for mayor, or did he come up with the
No,
idea?
he came up, and also I've been a problem solver since I was very young. People would come to me with their problems, and I think Bill saw me that way. That's what I saw when he suggested it. LA at that time had gone through the worst economic recession in history, and you had the Rodney King riots, and the national media tore LA apart as if it is a city that wasn't going anywhere.
Right. I mean, today, we here at Loyola Marymount University do one of the largest social surveys in the region. We interview 2,400 individuals randomly selected every year, and we ask people if things are going in the right direction. And we've had very high marks in the last couple of years. And it's hard for people to imagine what the feeling in Los Angeles was back in the late 80s, early 90s. It was, as you said, we had the most severe recession up until the 2008 recession. We had a real estate downturn where people were losing value in their homes. Every single part of the city was that was occurring. We had the riots in 1992. You were elected in 93, and then right after you were elected, we had those fires in 1993 that felt like they were consuming the whole county, even though I don't think it crossed the city boundaries, but it didn't matter. It was impacting all of LA. Then in 94, we had the earthquake. Then in 1995, we had the O.J. Simpson trial. And everybody was just thinking that the city wasn't worth living in, so much so that the Raiders would prefer to be in Oakland than in Los Angeles. I mean, think about that. So,
You'd have to meet Al Davis. Of course, he just died, but he was the most horrible person I've ever met, and he would come up with every time.
Don't hold back, okay? When we're talking, I want you to. But no, Mayor, you lost football for us. You were mayor and now I've not been able to go to a football game.
What's your point?
Yeah. Well, we always talk about how come you don't write in the fact that we don't have NFL football and it happened during your tenure. Do you take responsibility for that?
Well, I think we all should take, as this happened in several people's tenure. And
well, what happened there? What did Al Davis want?
Money. He wanted money, and he got from Oakland. They gave him.
Every NFL owner wants money, and they always get it.
Well, but back then he was. Most of them now are, billionaires on the side.
Mm-hmm. And I wish I was a billionaire on the side.
Right. Well, you saw they bought the Clippers and the L.A. Dodgers. That's just pocket money for them. And it will be for some of you, by the way.
Yeah. So again, the context. LA was really going through a downturn. The name Los Angeles and Hollywood has always been a brand. It's been a brand throughout the world, but it was really being tarnished for a variety of different issues that were occurring. Some of them were trends, some of them were individual events. And into this abyss, you decide to run and become mayor. And your tagline is tough enough to turn LA around. Now, some people thought that you were appealing to people who were annoyed about the riots, and you were saying that you were going to be tough on those who rioted. Is that how you meant that tagline?
I don't know. My handlers on that made me take that line, and we got the votes
Okay,
for
so you're
it.
admitting to the students that you had handlers, that you weren't coming up with these things on your own. It's like,
We had a contest with all my staff and everybody to come up with what's the best line that we could use, and we had like 400 suggestions. And then Bill Wardlow came up with the idea, tough enough to turn LA around, and it worked for whatever.
well, but you understand why.
I know why you're saying that.
Yeah.
And you should be with the LA Times.
Okay. I'm an ultra-liberal Democrat. You know that, right?
You are?
Yeah. So the mayor did appoint me to several commissions. You appointed me to the Housing Commission. You appointed me to the Transportation Commission.
Yeah.
And actually, he had no choice. As we talked earlier, there's so few Republicans. He had to appoint Democrats just to fill the positions.
Well, I remember I appointed Al Villalobos, remember?
I wouldn't bring that one up if I was you right now. It's like, and we'll contextualize that one in a second. I think when I think about your mayorship, you did turn LA around, and it was this. It was the perfect time for someone like you to be mayor, and since then, I don't think anybody like you could become mayor. As a matter of fact, I would say after you left, you endorsed Steve Sobroff, and he lost. After that, you endorsed Hertzberg, and he lost. After that, you endorsed Wendy Gruhl, and she lost. So if I'm going to run for mayor, I would ask you to endorse my opponent, because your track record lately has been. So what do you look for when you're trying to endorse somebody that's going to run for mayor, and how come they keep losing?
Well, I have fun watching my friends lose. No, it is strange. I'll tell you the reason I lost a lot of those is the unions have much more control now than they had when I was mayor. And they would be for my opponents here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but no, actually, the last election, although unions, I think, played on both sides, the major unions were actually endorsing Wendy Gruhl. So you were with the unions at that time.
Well, I was, but first of all, she ran a terrible campaign. She's a wonderful leader in person. And Garcetti ran a great campaign with Bill Carrick, who was ran my campaign for the second term, represented Garcetti, and they did a great job. I have to.
So we are here at Loyola Marymount University talking to former Mayor Richard Riordan, who does not want to be called a philanthropist, but he is one. He doesn't want to be called an enabler, but he is one. He empowers people. I think the number one thing I got from this book is about empowering. And when I talk to many of the people who work for you, and I've known many of them and talked to them, they say that the greatest thing about working for Richard Riordan, either in the public or private sector, was that he really did believe that. He would say, hey, I need you to go do something, go and do it. And you don't need to ask for my permission. We both know what the end result has to be. Go and do it. And that you would then, if they messed up, that you would back them up.
Let me give you one example of that. A month after I was elected mayor, I met with the fashion industry, and we try to meet with a different industry every month. But in meeting with the fashion industry, after the meeting, two of the leaders came up to me and they said, Mayor, we shouldn't ask you this of you, but behind the Fashion Mart at 3 o'clock every afternoon, our customer cars are towed away, and it makes no sense. And we finished the meeting, I came out of the room, and the first person from my staff I met was Bill Violani, who, by the way, had been head of the police union before. And Bill, I said, I have a problem for you I want you to solve, is about the tollway cars. Get me a simple plan on how we can get rid of those. And about 2 weeks later, he came up with a 50-page plan from our Department of Transportation that showed how we could easily, in 6 to 8 years, get rid of some of the sign. And I said, Bill, that's not possible. I'm the business mayor. I'm the tough enough to turn LA around. Find me a simple way to get it done. And then I forgot about it for a month, and about a month later I ran into Bill. I said, hey, how about those tollway signs? I haven't seen anything on my desk. And he said, it's taken care of, Mayor. I said, Bill, what's on my desk? He says, nothing. It's been taken care of. And I said, what do you mean? He said, my son and I went out the next night, and we took the signs down.
And so had they been arrested by your own LAPD, then you would have put up the bail to get them out, right?
I would have fired the chief of police.
Let's try to talk about that. You wanted to fire the chief of police, but you didn't. I mean, let's talk about the chief of police. The second most important position in the city of LA besides mayor is chief of police. And you've dealt with three of them. You dealt with Daryl Gates, you dealt with Willie Williams, and you dealt with Bernard Parks.
Well, I was the one who wrote the letter for Gates to resign.
Before you're mayor.
Before I was mayor. You know, Tom Bradley asked me to do that, and I got him to resign. As far as Willie Williams, we had, it's ironic, but we had the commission that was appointed after some of the riots to change things, and that commission made it very hard to get rid of a chief of police.
It was even hard before that, though. I mean,
Tom
Bradley could not get rid of the. It's interesting. The chief of police theoretically reports to the mayor, but yet he can completely and totally ignore the mayor and do what he wanted, and that's exactly what Daryl Gates was doing. He wouldn't return his phone calls.
But I got Daryl to resign finally.
Right. But after how many years that? Well, Tom Bradley wanted him gone for years.
I did it within about 6 or 8 months, I think.
No, I understand that, Mr. Mayor. But what I was trying to communicate, though, is Tom Bradley wanted to fire Daryl Gates for many years.
Oh, that's true, yeah.
Right? And it took someone like you to come in and help him finally get rid of him. But the mayor wanted him gone for at least 4 years. You wanted Willie Williams gone for 3 years, and you didn't get rid of him. Okay? And it's, what I'm saying is, what a convoluted political system where one of the police chief, who's supposed to report to a civilian body or a person like you, the mayor, and you can't get rid of them. You know, explain how that happens to the students, that a mayor of Los Angeles can't get rid of a police chief.
Well, we'll talk about in a few minutes, I assume, about changing the charter, which we did. But you're right. Back then, under the charter, you couldn't get rid of any heads of the department if 2/3 of the city council vetoed it. And the city council was very liberal. Willie Williams was appointed by Tom Bradley before. He was African American, which some people said it turned me into a racist. I should say my second time around running for office, I had 57% of the African Americans favoring me until I fired Willie Williams about 3 or 4 weeks before the election. And then when the election came, I got 30% of the African American, which is amazing for a Republican, even that many. But Willie was, was a nice guy, but he just wasn't with it to do things. After the earthquake, his wife was scared. He was supposed to be one of the leaders then, and he never got into the office until 11 a.m., and the only way we got him is I sent some police officers there to pick him up and bring him back down. I talked the media out of mentioning it. I told the media, if you love L.A. like I do, do not make the leaders look bad, because we need the support of everybody. And they did. To their credit, they never mentioned it. It was mentioned years later.
Yeah. So the point, though, is that in Los Angeles, as a progressive city, and the progressives of the turn of the century, the 19 teens, et cetera, put together a system that really weakened a strong mayor and decentralized.
Right.
And they wanted to protect civil servants. And so that you were selected as a police chief in a very systematic process, and they wanted to depoliticize that and make sure that the police chief wasn't a henchman for the mayor. And so that's why they make it very difficult to fire the police chief or anybody else so that they could act independently and not be politicized. But part of that is, of course, then they become very independent themselves. They can't be fired. they become their own power center who are not elected. And so that was a wide aspect or a very important aspect of the progressives, that it empowers bureaucrats or civil servants, excuse me. It empowers civil servants to the detriment of political leaders. But it also prevents political leaders from politicizing or corrupting civil servants. So we understand that give and take. And so now we're trying to rectify that. And the charter that kind of institutionalized all that was in 1925, and we kept adding things to it. And the charter, for many of you, really is the constitution of the city. And when we say, or if you read in his book and it says the city charter, basically we're saying it's the city's constitution. And that's, how long is the U.S. Constitution?
It's like 10 pages long or something?
A little bit shorter than that.
It is?
Yeah, Mr. Lawyer. It's a lot shorter than that. Okay? The city charter, when you got into office, was like 400 pages long. Okay? And so they would put everything in the charter, and things could only then be changed by a vote of the people to change the charter. And that's what you were faced with, this gigantic constitution that basically prescribed a lot of little actions, including how you got rid of the police chief. And so then the mayor, along with a variety of different other individuals, began what we call charter reform.
Right.
Talk to the students a little bit about why you wanted to do charter reform and how that happened.
Well, what I determined with the help of Bill Wardlow and others that we needed to change the charter away from the 1926, and that we needed to put more power into the mayor's hands, including hiring his own lawyer instead of having a city attorney separate, and the same with police and others. Now, the city council got smart, and they set up a committee to come up with a different charter changes than mine, and they were going to put the same ones, theirs on the ballot and mine on the ballot. So what we did finally was meet with them and come up with a compromise, not all that I liked, and I won't get into Erwin Chemerinsky, but it didn't come out nearly as well as I liked. The main thing that did come out is that the mayor has control over the heads of every department except the police department. And on the police department, the city council essentially can veto anything the mayor does. They can't do. Now, what happens, I'm a Republican, the liberal Democrats are not going to really support me. They supported me on 98% of the things I put up there, but the 2% were the most important. And wherever the unions were, they were, and they would vote against it.
So you talk about you being a Republican, but yet most of your staff were Democrats. You talk about you being a businessman, but then you in the book talk about, and you just mentioned Bill Volante, who was the head of the very powerful police union, and then Helen Bernstein, who was the head of the teachers union, right? And so you have this ability to bring in these different people to be part of your coalition, so much so that quote-unquote real Republicans don't consider you a Republican. They call you a rhino. Tell the students what a rhino is.
Okay, what does a rhino mean? Does anybody here know? Right. A Republican in name only.
Meaning that you call yourself a Republican, but you don't follow any of the policies. You're like, you were pro-immigrant rights, you were pro-gay rights, you were pro-women's reproductive rights. You know, you're a Democrat.
No, well, except...
Yes, you're a Democrat.
Tell Obama that. I think Obama is an atrocious president.
You're just saying that to cover your tracks and antagonize us liberal Democrats.
No, I think the Republicans could easily get elected if they leave these social issues out and forget about it. My father had a statement. He said, "This is."
Wait. Democrats could get elected if they left social issues out, which is everything they run for, and they've been winning in California. That makes no sense to me.
They do on taxing, on budgets and things like that, I'm with Republicans. My dad said, this is a story of Mr. McVeigh who died defending his right-of-way. And that's what we Republicans would do a lot of the time. By coming out against abortion and contraception and gay rights and things like that, we just kept, in immigration, we chopped ourselves in the foot all the time. You take Mitt Romney, he came out against the DREAM Act. You know, nobody knew what the DREAM Act was. But he made, in effect, the Latinos, what he told me was, don't worry, the Latinos are family people. They like education. They want to live in safe places. They'll vote Republican. And I said, wait, they're not going to vote Republican because they don't think Republicans like them. And I think that's the way it came out.
That's right. I totally agree with you. As a Latino, I agree with that. You know?
Okay.
So you're a rhino, and and you had no choice really in this democratic city, and you're kind of fortunate that we have nonpartisan elections, another progressive era reform that says any office any local office has to be run nonpartisan, meaning that when you are on the ballot, it doesn't say Republican or it doesn't say Democrat. It just says Richard Riordan, businessman, or Richard Riordan, philanthropist. Oh, you wouldn't have put that on your...
Keep that word to yourself. Huh?
Okay. And so people, when they went to vote, many of them didn't know you were Republican. Okay? And so they would not, you would have lost a lot of votes had people known you were a Republican just because of people's antagonism.
Are you accusing me of lying to the
No,
people?
no, not at all. I'm just saying that the political system in Los Angeles is very favorable to someone like you who is middle of the road and moderate and can appeal when the partisan labels aren't out there. They take a look more at the policies and the person. And I think that benefited you
Well,
tremendously.
I get right now.
And here's my point, though.
Yeah.
When you ran in a partisan election, because folks, I don't know if you remember this, he ran for governor, okay, in a partisan election where he had to run as a Republican in the Republican primary, okay, and in my estimation, of all the Republicans running, you were the best one, because you're really not a Republican, and you lost.
Well, I'll take blame for it. I put together the wrong team. They hadn't had experience. And certainly my opponents used the name Rhino, and they beat me in the primary. And it was foolish because in all the polls, I could have beaten Gray Davis.
Right.
If I ran against him. And Davis was smart enough to put $12 million to get my opponents in the primary in.
Right. So you got to remember at that time, was it 2000 or 2002? 2002. In 2002, Governor Gray Davis is running for re-election. And then the election happens, and Bill Jones, who's then Secretary of State, is running, and Simon, who's a businessman, is also running, with multimillionaire, and you're running. Gray Davis does the same poll that you do, and the polls show that if Richard Riordan wins the Republican nomination, that he could beat Davis in the general election. Davis has no opposition in his primary because he's the incumbent governor. Everybody backs him up. And so he's raised a ton of money. Instead of spending it in the primary against other Democrats, he spends it attacking you and only you, knowing that it would weaken him, and then he can make sure he knocks him out, and that he would then run against either Simon or Bill Jones and easily beat them. Aren't you kind of, that's pretty smart tactics, right?
Yeah, I think it's smart on his part, and it shows how stupid I was then.
Well, how would you do that race differently? Well, number one, would you still run for governor in 2002 if you can go back, even though you lost?
Right now?
Yeah.
Well, no, I think it's a different atmosphere right now, but
Back in
Back
2000, in 2002.
I don't know whether I would, but I would have at least been very careful to see if I can pick up some of those Democratic votes, or rather Republican votes.
Mm-hmm.
And
It means you would have to move to the right.
well, and unfortunately, it's true. I mean, Mitt Romney, who I think would have been a great president, he had to move to the right, and then he got into the general election. He couldn't get away from that.
Yeah. What was your number one success as mayor of Los Angeles?
Well, I mean, I think most people would say the earthquake.
You caused the earthquake?
Well, I think
The response to the earthquake, obviously, but I mean,
another would be, and this is where I give Bill Ochi, one of my top people, was beefing up the police department. He put out Project Safety after, and we got everybody to agree to it, and we added like well over 1,000 police officers on the street. I also, when I think of being mayor, I think of that story about going to the neighborhood, the poor neighborhood, and telling them to make changes. And then I think about maybe the earthquake. After the earthquake, all of a sudden the city, which lacked confidence before the earthquake, gained confidence. So after the earthquake, they did all these changes themselves. They made it happen, and they regained their confidence.
I totally agree with that. I think that is the turning point of that decade of despair or that era of malaise, late 80s, early 90s. That earthquake, which could have actually made it even worse, turned out to be the turning point from a positive perspective. So let me challenge you a little bit about the police. How do we know how many police we need? We currently are supposed to have 10,000. I'm sure we have like 9,500 police. When you first became mayor, I think we had like 775,
Yeah.
and then you increased that. So many say that we were under-policed. Many still complain that LA is under-policed, but yet crime has significantly declined. What's so magic about that 10,000 number, about having 10,000 police?
Well, I think it's like we have half as many police per capita as New York City has per capita, and I think we need those, and it's a question of how you use them. And I think the worst thing ever happened to my administration was the consent decree with the Justice Department on racial, what do they call it, racial profiling and things like that, where we had to spend like $35 million a year on that, and we could have put almost 1,000 more police officers on the street for that.
Right, but you just can't become, you become mayor in 1993, you just cannot wipe away the history of LAPD. Even though you're saying, hey, I'm a different mayor, I'm going to be tough on the police, I'm going to believe on discipline, I'm going to deploy them differently. And so everybody, forget what the LAPD has done in the past. Forget how they beat up Rodney King, forget Rampart, forget all that. I'm going to take care of things. I know that you would want to do that, but the rest of LA, certain communities are going to say, no way, the police aren't going to change their culture right away. We need intervention, and that's what the feds did. They came in and they intervened. I agree, as an Angelino, that it helped a little bit, it cost too much, it stifled some other innovation. So I wish we hadn't had this consent decree, but I understand why, and when it first came up, I was actually very much for it.
Well, I mean, quite honestly, my theory is I was responsible. I was head of the city, so they didn't have to do it, hold me responsible, kick me out of office, put me in jail, or whatever, unless I do it. But
let me challenge you on that, because I think Mayor Bradley would have said the same thing. I'm responsible, hold me responsible. If I do a bad job, don't reelect me. Yet he continued to get reelected. And many people thought that no matter what you did, you probably would get reelected in 1997. And so I know that elected officials love to say that. Sheriff Baca said, hey, if you have a problem with the way I'm running the jails, et cetera, just vote me out. People voted me in. And so I'm not sure that's a realistic way of saying that you're responsible and therefore they should just unelect you or recall you or just not vote for you next time.
Maybe it's because I had confidence in myself that I could get something done, and I'd bring on the right people to help me make it happen.
But you understand the history of the LAPD.
I understand why they may have thought that way, but
yeah.
And I don't think the people from Washington, the bureaucrats there, knew what they were doing exactly.
Well, I agree with that, but that does not dismiss the fact that we had a problematic police department and had historically had problems with certain communities, and that was a problem.
But I spent, as mayor, I spent more time in the African American communities than any other place in the city.
But let me, as mayor, the number one issue, as mayor, if you take a look at the LA City budget, is public safety and police. So what % of your time as mayor did you spend on police issues, the police department, crime, public safety, or however you want to define it?
Well, I had people like Bill Ochi and others, who did most of it, but I did an awful lot of it myself. I mean, like this afternoon, I spent today, this exact day, this afternoon, in South LA, at the corner of Manchester and Vermont, talking about crime in the cities. And if everybody here has ever heard of SEA, group of continuation schools to help people try to get rid of gangs. And it's something that, and I also run a chain of 12 African American charter schools, which, by the way, is the finest, toughest thing I've ever done in my life.
So we talked about the number one success, your response to the earthquake, and I think how it did turn around LA, and I totally agree. What was your biggest disappointment? The consent decree?
Did you have to ask that? I think it was a consent decree. One that other people might mention is Rampart.
Yeah.
What happened, there was a scandal in Rampart where some of the police officers had, invented things that didn't actually happen. And I remember Geraldo on TV said, well, Mayor, you were mayor during this. Don't you take full responsibility for it?
Yeah.
And I was taught in politics, count to 3 before you give an answer. Because you can think of a lot of things in 3 seconds. So I thought of, first of all, I wanted to fire the police chief who was there right then. Secondly, I wasn't mayor when all these things happened. So what do you think the answer was to the question? Somebody raise your hand. If you were mayor, how would you answer that question?
And the question was, a very famous journalist said, hey, aren't you responsible for this police scandal called Rampart because you were mayor while it happened? And how would you guys answer? No, I wasn't mayor. I didn't know I was mayor.
No.
Or, no.
What my answer was, yes, I take responsibility.
All right. And then what was the follow-up question to that?
No, the interesting thing, there was no follow-up.
Yeah.
It never appeared in the papers or on TV.
Yeah. So
It wasn't interesting. If you deny it, you're asking the reporters to go out and ask your enemies whether if I knew what I was doing when I denied it.
So you got your choice then to select your own police chief, and you selected Bernard Parks, who had been in the police department for many decades. Really exuded what meant to be an LAPD officer, African American, and I thought a great police chief. Although the policemen themselves did not like him, the union hated him, some of his command hated him. But why do you think he was, in a sense, he did not get reappointed? So police chiefs get appointed for a 5-year term, and then at the end of 5 years, they can be reappointed for another 5-year term, and that's it. They have term limits. You appointed Bernard Parks. He was, after the end of 5 years, you were no longer mayor, and he did not get reappointed.
Well, first of all,
Why?
Bernie Parks was a brilliant man. If I had any criticism of him, he may, be too much of a micromanager. Mm-hmm. But I think the average police officer respected him. But the union did not like him. Particularly, he was against having 4-day week
Right.
work weeks.
What do you think about that situation?
Well, it's terrible because it's equivalent of taking about 500 police officers off the street, which is maybe $25 million a year.
Right.
that
So
it
in other
costs.
words, a police officer could work, how many days? Just 3 days?
We can work, I think it's 4 days.
4 days.
Or
They
maybe
work-
it's 3 days.
I
yeah.
think it's either 3 or 4 days, and then they have 3 or 4 days off. And then that's what the union wanted. Therefore, police officers couldn't have these 4 or 5 or 6, even 6-day weekends on certain situations.
They take
And I don't
another
wanna-
job.
Right. Well, I don't want to downplay that was just a weekend. And part of the problem was that LAPD officers, many of them had second jobs because of this. So I believe strongly that when we are recruiting police officers, that we should prioritize individuals who are residents of LA. Okay, and so that, do you have a problem with that in saying if you know, not that it would be exclusive, but that you would get extra points if you have lived in LA? And then as police officers are going up the ranks, and even for promotion and even for a pay increase, that if you live in LA, that you then get extra points for that. What do you think about that?
I think it's a great idea. I'm not sure it's workable.
No, you can make it work.
Okay, well, it just, but the question is it too expensive? Now, Playa Vista, which is
How would it
near,
be more expensive? You pay them the same.
Playa Vista now they have affordable housing, which I was talking to Merle here about. And affordable housing is typically, we'll give you a permit in the city if you put away 10% or 5% of the units as affordable for units.
Right, great idea.
So the people in Playa Vista came up with a brilliant idea. We'll allow the police and firemen to be that 10%, which...
Yeah, but they make over 100,000. How's that affordable?
Well, that was the definition of affordable, which, and I think it's irresponsible to do that, but it works. I mean, it works in the sense that they have better protection.
Right, but that's my whole point, that if the majority of police officers lived in LA, the fact that they lived in a neighborhood would make that neighborhood safe on their way home.
But how do they get a discount? Because even on 100,000 a year.
Well, wait a minute. LA is so big. Every range of housing exists in Los Angeles. When someone tells me I can't afford to live in LA, I'm like, wait, we have houses that range anywhere from 200,000 to, you know, where you live,
Well,
20 million.
What planet do you live on now?
LMU, that's the best planet around.
Well, look, I mean, it's very different now. We're talking about gentrification. The city is becoming gentrified all over the place.
Yeah, I understand that, but I want to stick to the point. I think police officers should if the city of LA pays your wages with our public dollars, we should say you live in there. Now, it is actually against the law. There's a state law that prohibits cities from doing that because the police unions went up to the state legislature and got them to pass that law. Okay?
Well,
So
let's say
it's
you
only
get that
city.
law changed. I think if the city can do it, it's a question of the budget of the city, but it's a good idea if you can make it happen.
Okay. The other thing about if you had Bernard Parks does not get reappointed, and then soon after that he runs for city council. Okay, and in my estimation, he was one of the best city council members around in terms of the budget, et cetera, except for the last 2 or 3 years, where he's really been isolated, and he's become, in my mind, one of the least effective council members,
Well-
even though he's still one of the smartest ones, but just because of the way he played that out. You've seen this unfold. What do you think about what's happened to
Well, I
Bernard
think
Parks?
it's something I'd have to think about, but I got along with the city council better than he did. I was a Republican.
Yeah.
He was a Democrat, but Bernie, again, is a micromanager to some extent. And to his credit, he fought against the pensions of health care and these astronomical amounts that are paid. But let me get, I don't know how much more time do we have here?
How much more time do you need?
As long as you want, because I think, let's get into the question of gentrification.
Okay.
And I don't know if you want to start. Do you want?
I'm Merrill Butler, and I'm actually one of those terrible.
Stand up.
Okay.
Well, you didn't tell me you're a SC grad.
Like this is my show. This is my classroom. Okay? I call on people. You're the guest here. So it's like, okay, go ahead. Ask a question. Let me do that. Hold on 1 second.
Okay. I'm a real estate developer in LA, and my question to you is, what do you think of number one, what is happening from a development standpoint in downtown LA? Because we're seeing a lot of dense housing being built in downtown, and this is, I think, the first time that this has happened for as long as I can remember. And then secondly, I was wondering about your thoughts relating to development of peripheral areas of downtown LA, where we might be able to include housing that would be more in the affordable arena. And the fact that the city is, in most cases, asking for 20% of new housing to be in the affordable arena. So that's the mix, 80-20.
So let me ask you this question, kind of paraphrasing this. What can the mayor do about housing in Los Angeles? And what did you do about housing, about building more housing, about making it affordable, about making sure that people had a place to live?
Well, I think one thing unique I did was have the building and safety. They were going out to look at apartments and everything in the inner cities to see whether they were keeping up to code.
But that's not necessarily building more housing, though. That's just
Well,
improving
wait, 'cause
existing housing.
What we did was, no, what you're going to do is go there and make sure that if they have plumbing, they have heat, that's all they need if they do that, because otherwise we had 850,000 units that were below code, that we'd have to have them shut down those, and the landlords would love that. You shut them down, then build something more expensive where they are. So I think it was another part of the vigilante attitude I had. But
Okay, but what could a mayor of Los Angeles, you know the power, what can they do about improving housing in Los Angeles?
what they could do, and I talked to Merle about it before the speech, is if you took, let's say, 3 acres of land and you built condos 3 stories high, because
This is public land, 3 acres of public land?
it can be public or it can be cheap, non-public. But if it's non-public, it ain't cheap. So.
Right, right.
But it would have to be public. But if you did that, over 3 stories gets very expensive to build. So I use 3 stories, and if you built 600 square foot condos
600 square feet.
in 1 acre.
Dorm room.
Well, but we're talking about affordable housing, and we aren't giving one.
Well, dorms aren't
Percent.
affordable, but anyway.
Yeah, 1% of that, and you can take a 600 square foot condo and you can have where the living room becomes a master bedroom at night, where you have the right plumbing.
That doesn't solve the problem for families, though. I mean, that's a great, a 600 square foot condo is great for.
Well, you want to run for the city council then.
Yeah, yeah. I guess I was just, my whole point.
No, the question is, I have Gloria Molina and others are saying, oh, we have to give the poor exactly what we have, like 3,000 square foot condos and things. Yeah, but how many of the poor can we take care of for that? And let me go on with mine, that if you do it at 600 feet on one of the acres, and the other 2 acres are a park with a lot of the amenities of a park, it's not perfect by your
No.
answer or mine. Let me ask you a tough question.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think the poverty level is in Los Angeles? What is a family of 4 with 2 children, 2 children, a husband and wife?
I think it's about 18,000.
You're kidding. It's between 50 and 60,000
So a family of 4.
Just
In terms-
figure out-
Oh, you mean in terms of what you would need for the house? Yes.
for
Right.
housing, and you pay taxes at that rate too.
Right.
And things.
That's not the official federal poverty
No,
level. No, right.
but Obama doesn't know how the poor live. He lived as upper middle class, grew up.
Yeah, but you didn't know how the poor lived, and you were able to identify and do that. So I don't think you necessarily have to be, poor to be able to be
Because I did
sympathetic
it-
and develop
I-
effective public policy.
I learned from time I was a little kid. I was born in the Depression and
Yeah,
raised
but
in
you
the
grew up
Depression.
as an upper middle class.
Yeah.
Your father was a CEO, according to the book, and
Yeah.
one of the most important.
And I got paid no allowance. I had to go sell magazines and caddy and
That built character.
what?
That built character for you.
Yeah, right.
So let me get back to the housing and his question. I guess my opinion is that the mayor and the city have very little ability to solve the housing problem. It's really the private sector. And how do we incentivize the private sector to build more housing and appropriate housing? Okay? And no matter what, for someone to build, they have to make money. Okay? And so we create, and part of the cost when you talk to developers, they say that about anywhere from 15, in some cases 25% of the costs of building a home has nothing to do with the cost of the land, labor, or materials. It has to do with government regulation and city regulations and how.
Oh, at least that, yeah.
Yeah, so that's one area where the mayor and the city can deal with by quote-unquote streamlining and making sure that things happen
Well,
quickly.
it will never happen in
Why is that?
our lifetime.
I'm sorry to hear about that, but unfortunately, I kind of agree with
It's a
you.
large percentage of the taxes, and,
Yeah,
but I think, you know, the gentrification as such is that the poor can never afford those. And if you have the affordable housing, it will be just a tiny percent of what's necessary to handle that problem.
right, so let's go to downtown. I think that's a great question.
Downtown is,
Downtown in
what's it-
1993, downtown was nothing. You know, I think we had about maybe 8,000 residents that lived downtown in 1993. Today, we are over 50,000, okay? And if I could trace it to one event that changed that, was Staples Center.
absolutely, yeah.
Okay, talk to us about Staples Center, because that was not government built, but yet it created such a great impact.
Oh, well, in my book, it mentions that, again, where I empowered people, I had Steve Soberoff and Charlie Isgar, two people who worked with me, and they came up to me in my office and said, we've been on a helicopter ride all over the city, and we think the only place that you can put a new sports arena is next to the convention center. And I said, great, go to it, but I tell you, we'll never get there because you'll have to take down part of the convention center, and et cetera. And lo and behold, they made it happen.
Yeah.
And the city council fought it tooth and nail, and then gradually, step by step, we got them to approve it.
And now they take credit for it, right?
Oh, I can tell you a million things, and I don't, by the way, if you're a good leader, you don't care if somebody else takes credit.
So let me ask you about charter reform. We earlier talked about it, but I've always wanted to ask you this question, because you actually were very much a proponent of neighborhood councils. Have they worked the way you thought they would?
Absolutely not.
What, do you feel that, I think it's a great idea, by the way, but I think the implementation of has been horrific in some respects. Would you do it differently? Would
Well,
you
I
just
would try to-
would you cross them out completely, or how would you have tinkered right now? If you could go back and change the wording in the charter regarding neighborhood councils, what would you do?
I'd have to think about it because I'm going to be honest with you. Politically, it was something that would get a lot of votes for my charter reform to have, neighborhood councils. Clearly, to have them elected or appointed gets you another level of government that can really screw things up. Now, there are a few places around the city where the neighborhood councils are working quite well.
Right.
And I think if you had, the best I can think of is if you had a mayor as great as I was,
I know, I read it in your book. So, yeah.
that you would have the mayor essentially appoint the neighborhood council.
I don't think the neighborhood councils as currently constituted would agree with that.
No, I don't think.
What do you think about we're going to have an election very soon, I think 2 weeks from today, right? March 3rd. What's the turnout going to be?
I guess the turnout is 10%, would you guess?
Yeah. I think it's a little bit low, but not much lower. I think 12. I mean, we're picking here. I'm nitpicking. I'm thinking 12 to 13%. Okay, is that good for LA?
No, it's not. I tell you, the unions have been very
When you got
Smart
elected,
of
the
this.
first time turnout was 45%.
right.
Yeah. Now, in 2 weeks from today, there's an election in the city of Los Angeles that will elect half the city council. We expect turnout to be about 12 to 13%. In some areas, it might be as high as 15, 16%. In some areas, it will be low in single digits, 9%.
And there's the school board.
And they'll be even lower.
Well, and are very important elections.
All right. So there is a charter amendment on the ballot to move the elections from the odd years to the even years, in June and November. Are you for that?
As a Republican, I'm against it.
Why?
Because
No, how about as a citizen of LA?
I'm against it too, because I think it just puts the unions in total control.
Wait, you were just telling me the unions were in control right now.
Well, even more so. I mean, hopefully, like in some cases now, like the school boards, they're not as much control as they were.
I would actually disagree with you 100%. The lower the turnout, the less voters, the more a very well-organized group, especially the teachers' union that are just focused on the school board elections, can zero in and spend a very little bit amount of money for them and win. And I think that's been proven over
No,
the last...
I agree with you, but I don't agree with you on this election.
Okay, then what's the solution? If not this, what could we do?
I'd have to study it. Have these students here study it for me.
Okay. So you would, how about this idea that we've talked about in class, that we take everybody who voted and we put them in a lottery and give select somebody and give them $50,000. And then all of a sudden everybody would say, hey, I can win $50,000 just by voting. It's not against the law to do that, by the way, as long as government's not doing it. So someone, a philanthropist like Richard Riordan, could come up with $50,000 and say, hey, if you vote in this next election, I'll put you, because we'll know everybody. They don't have to do anything other than vote, because we know through the data that we have who voted or not.
That would make me more popular, huh?
Very popular. Right?
Let's see, I want to hear from these students out here.
No, they're going to have their time right now. So what do you think about the lottery idea? Again, you're trying to take over my class. It's like...
I think you're a lousy communist.
I am a lousy communist. I agree. My other problem is that I'm a lousy capitalist as well. So it's like, that's why I have to be a professor. So you like the lottery idea or not?
No, I think I like it, but I don't like it enough to say yes or no right now.
Oh, I wasn't really asking you for $50,000. That was a rhetorical question. One more question, then I'm going to turn it over to the students and have you ask questions. You ran for governor. Mayor Bradley ran for governor. Sam Yorty ran for governor. You all lost. LA mayors can't win statewide office. Why?
I don't know the answer. Maybe it depends on who they are.
Okay, well, we got three of them right there, and all three
Well,
of them.
I'm not sure that that's a good example of it all, too.
So then you think that Antonio Villaraigosa is going to beat Kamala Harris for U.S. Senate?
Yes, I do. I think they will. I'm not going to bet my life on it, though.
No. So would you endorse Antonio over Kamala Harris?
Yes, I would.
Oh, okay. Hey, Antonio, if you're listening out there, I got you an endorsement from a rhino. I don't know how good that's going to be, though. Okay, questions. If you have a question, we need you to come up here just so we can get it on tape, and you can, as you can see, you can ask the mayor anything, and he will not necessarily answer and go on and talk about something else. So you need to go up there, okay? And so for those of you who want to ask questions, so we talked about this earlier. Well, you were mayor, we lost football, and then the Dodgers got sold. And yet everybody always talks about how important sports are for the city. Are sports really that important for the city?
Yes, they are, very much.
But you lost us football then.
Well, it left. When you say I lost it.
You were mayor when we lost football.
I was mayor, yeah.
Okay.
I was mayor when the New York Yankees lost the pennant.
All right. You should say the Lakers actually won a couple of championships when you were mayor, right?
Yeah, I take credit for that.
Okay. Introduce yourself.
Hi.
My name is Tay Adger. I'm a student of Dr. Guerra's, and I just wanted to know. I bought the book, and I saw some.
He wants his money back.
I thought that the book was really interesting, and I saw that you when you became mayor, you saw that there was a big budget crisis going on in the city, and you said that you reached out to look for help, and you said that you looked to other politicians, and I just wanted to know what was one thing that you learned from another politician, whether they were Democrat or a rhino or whatever. What was one thing that you learned that really helped the city?
Oh, well, I guess I learned like Willie Brown, you know who he is?
Yes.
He was the head of the legislature in Sacramento when I was mayor, and then he became mayor of San Francisco. And I remember calling him up one day, and I said, Willie, I'd like to have my people come up tomorrow morning and discuss with your staff and with you AB 489. And he said, Riordan, what are you doing? You're wasting my time? I said, no. He said, well, what are you for? Are you for it or against it? I said, I'm against it. Well, it's dead, so don't send your people up here and waste my time. And he did. He killed it.
Well,
But I learned something like that. It's your relationship with other politicians is so important. So don't make enemies of them. I was actually like, friendly on a social basis with almost every member of the city council. I can only think of one exception,
and who was that?
Rita Walters.
Okay.
But the others, I like them and they like me, even though we disagreed on
Well, at least they told
some
you
issues.
they liked you. Are you sure they liked you?
You what?
I said, at least they told you they liked you. Are you sure they liked you?
I never dated them.
Okay, you cover a lot about that in the book, but we're not going to get into it right now. So let me ask you something. Other students who want to come up here and ask a question.
Yeah.
What's the biggest
Maybe ask
difference?
too many questions.
Yeah. What's the biggest difference between being a business executive and a government executive? It kind of gets to Quante's question as well. You've been both. You've made millions of dollars running a law firm. You've made millions of dollars being a venture capitalist. And then you made a great impact being mayor. So you've been executive in different, and then you've been an executive in the nonprofit world as well. So you've been an executive in really 4 different worlds: law, business or venture capitalism, government, nonprofit. Are there differences, or are the principles the same in all 4
I think
areas?
the principles are pretty much the same. If you're in private business, of course, you have real power over, what lawyers you pick, what people you hire, et cetera. But I think certainly, as I mentioned about, it's much easier to get forgiveness and permission. It applies legally in the private and illegally in the public, but it works.
I know there's a lot of students who have extra credit needs that want to ask questions, so come on.
My name is Mauro Gomez, and I'm political science major. And by the way, you also mentioned that word. You mentioned at the beginning forgiveness. To whom you ask those kind of forgiveness, and how does that work in politics?
Forgiveness. When you ask, I mean, you're a good Catholic. Oh, well, not necessarily. I read your book, so you're a very prominent Catholic. Okay, forgiveness. And you studied under Jesuits. He went to a Jesuit school. He couldn't get into Loyola Marymount University, so he went to Santa Clara. And so. Forgiveness. When you ask for forgiveness, in terms of politically speaking, or even in terms of your own personal beliefs, how do you go about doing that?
Well, first of all, I never had to. Nobody ever
Could you
complained.
just say it's better to ask for forgiveness than to permission?
Yeah, but that's just a way of telling people it's easier, because if you ask for forgiveness, people won't get mad at you and say, oh, I'm sorry. Or,
You're just saying that, so what happens is you go and you act, and you don't ask for permission, and so it's not necessarily easy to ask for permission, and it's not necessarily, and you necessarily never even have to give or ask for forgiveness because people just let it slide by.
let me go back when you cut me off at the beginning about me teaching at UCLA at the business school. My axioms were courage, which I mentioned what it is, including it's much easier to get forgiveness. Second one is caring. And that is caring for everybody you meet, from the janitor to the president of a company.
In the book, you
Care
call that character as well.
And you talked about, you learn from everybody. And that was probably one of the things. Anytime I sat on a train or an airplane or anything, I would learn a lot from the person next to me. But caring. The other next is empowering others. We've talked about that a lot. The next is relentless pursuit of goals. Be a closer. Just get it, make it happen. And give people the power to make it happen, and whatever you have on your plate, make it happen. He disagrees with me.
No, then you talked about curiosity as well, which is like what you
Yeah.
said. You're sitting next to an airplane, you're always curious. I hate sitting next to people like you who keep asking me questions. I just want to like read my newspaper or what have you. But and then you finally talk about a sense of humor.
Well, that I also, the question is, well, I said be a closer, and now a sense of humor. Let me ask a question here. Can you teach somebody a sense of humor? Anybody think you can? Raise your hand if you think.
I could teach anything to anybody.
Well, I mean, because they need a sense of humor to take your class.
Oh. Okay, that was okay. Okay, I'm going to put you on the spot now.
Well,
Okay, that was a gauntlet. Okay, so, wow. I don't know about that. Okay, so you think you're funny, huh? Okay, we're going to get another question.
My name is Maria Corral, and I'm a student also in Fernando Guerra's class, and I'm a Chicano Studies major. I read your book, and two things seem to be very prominent. It's money and relationships. Which do you think is more important?
Money or relationships?
Yeah.
Networking?
Well,
I don't think he means personal. She doesn't mean your marriages, that you talk about. She's talking about the relationships in terms of networking, as you
no,
mentioned.
I think the networking is the most important thing. And of course, I mean, the more money you have, the more people will want to network with you. So there's certainly that goes in there. But I know if you go to business school, I went to law school at Michigan, which was, I think, the best law school in the country, except for one thing. We didn't have the best students in the country. Harvard did. And Harvard, they connected with each other. And when they went to Wall Street, they knew each other on Wall Street, and it was very effective. And I think UCLA is pretty good at that. SC is, but not nearly to the extent that Harvard is, or Stanford, for that matter.
If I can follow up with that.
Yeah, sure.
So you talk about how you want to help the underprivileged, and I think that one of the problems I see, at least in the neighborhood that I live in, is the lack of the ability to network. How can you fix that, or how can you help or advise?
Where do you live?
Inglewood, California.
Englewood? Mm-hmm. Well, that's becoming gentrified like mad, right? We drove by there, we left Watts and drove through Englewood to get here tonight.
Yeah.
And you can see big changes there
Yeah.
in Englewood.
But people, I think Maria's question is a lot of underprivileged or
Yeah.
poor individuals are isolated. How do
Well,
we?
They are, and so that could relate any place, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very hard to, for somebody who's poor to connect with people who are well off or similar. But there are some people who can be taught to do that. I've seen some kids, poor kids, come up and they want to meet with you, and they force themselves into meeting with you. You say, oh, God, this guy's a pain in the neck. But I said, I used to be that way. But I think, you can do better. And again, everybody you meet. You go into the store where you buy tobacco or wherever it is, and you learn from the owner of that store what you can. Just figure this. Anybody you meet, you can learn something from.
Thank you.
Yeah, next question. Yeah, so Eric Garcetti, did he call you up and say, hey, I'm now mayor, I want to talk to you about being mayor, and if he didn't, or if he did, what would you have said to him?
Well, first of all, surround himself with a lot stronger people than he has. He has too many wannabe politicians around him. And he's got to pick the tough issues. Traffic, what do you think, anybody here want to guess, what is the main thing we have to do to improve the traffic? Or to stop it from being worse? Stop building all these high buildings that bring more cars and people. to neighborhoods. It's okay in downtown, but it's not okay in the rest of the city. No.
So what would you say to Garcetti?
What I'm saying,
Help
okay.
a new mayor.
Okay, what I would say to Garcetti is, you know, you got to figure out what to do and then figure out a way to do it. Now, example now are the ports. Have you been following what's happening in the ports? Why don't you
Yeah.
explain to them?
So what's been happening in the ports, the unions have had a little bit of a slowdown. They're in negotiations, and now the Obama administration and the Secretary of Labor have now intervened because at the local level, we weren't able to get it done. So it's the unions and not the port itself, but the actual shipping lines that are in negotiations. But the port or the mayor's office could intervene or should have intervened and try to help and smooth this along, but we had to go to the feds.
Well, that's exactly what you did. I think this could be the legacy of Garcetti, is to solve this problem because it's costing a zillion jobs. You know, the average worker makes $150,000 a year in the ports.
At the ports, right.
At the ports. Now, they're employees of the private corporations, and they're not employees of the city, which I think is stupid, but, you know, it has to be changed. But essentially, you have to solve that problem. It is costing not only jobs at the port, but jobs throughout the city and everything, because a lot of the retail goods that are supposed to be sold in the city are in ships offshore that can't be unloaded.
So right now, there are over 35 ships, one of those large containers, just right outside the San Pedro ports, just waiting to come in.
Well,
right.
And then another thing, that if you wake up, the Panama Canal within the next year will have doubled its capacity. And all of a sudden, it can be competitive with the Port of LA and Long Beach.
Right. Let's get some more questions, because I know we're running out of time. Yep.
Hello, Mr. Riordan. I'm a former student of Dr. Guerra's, and I've had a lot of experience working in the public sector, seeing the way that neighborhood councils actually work, and kind of relating to Maria's question earlier about impoverished or underrepresented communities. What would you recommend neighborhood councils could do for communities like that in order to get street improvements or things like that from the city of LA?
Wow. We were just talking on the side about that. I think the neighborhood councils should not consider themselves to be a third of the executive powers of the city, the mayor, the city council, and now they should be advisory to the mayor and to the city council members.
But they should bring up these issues. I mean, they know the neighborhood better than almost anybody, because they live that neighborhood, right?
And ideally, their head should be very, very sociable and likable to the city council and to the mayor.
Yeah, next question.
Hello, Mr. Mayor. My name is Anika, and I'm also from Dr. Guerra's class. So my question is, well, basically, you talk a lot about doing things without permission and then asking for forgiveness. So if there was a situation in LA that currently persists that would require, like, what would you recommend us to do if, like, we didn't take permission for something and just went ahead and did it? Like, what situation in LA?
What current issue requires someone to just act and not ask for?
Well, you need the mayor in support of it, because an example, Jessica and I were fighting to get some trees removed from St. Tribulus School, which is in the inner city. And the contractor refused to do that because he could lose his license, you know, to remove it. So we had to go through all kinds of things in the city to get it permission to do it.
Oh, man, you should have called me. I know a bunch of guys over by Home Depot. We would have taken care of that.
Well, we got everything done. This is an amazing city.
Yeah.
And everybody, and I'd say, hooray, hooray. All of a sudden, we get a phone call from somebody who always said, you haven't gotten a permit from the tree people.
Yeah.
They said, what do you mean? Well, you have to put up 4 trees for every one you take down. So we had to do that, and we finally got it done. But, you know, these permits are so stupid and unreasonable most of the time. And you should be on those trees. Just go in and tear the trees down and, worry about and ask for forgiveness later on.
Well, I want to thank the mayor for taking his time. I'm going to actually ask you, can you sign my book? Can you say to
Not
my,
after
to-
what you said tonight.
Can you say to my favorite liberal professor, Fernando Guerra, I love you. I wish I had met you sooner. And let's give Mayor Richard Riordan a hand for coming.